Welcome to the program. I'm Okbayemi Obosheni. We start off with business news. The Port Harcourt refinery in Rivers State has commenced crude oil processing. According to the Chief Corporate Communications Officer of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Femi Shonaye, the refinery will operate at 60% capacity. Shonaye said the refinery will process 60,000 barrels per day. The Port Harcourt refinery has a combined 250 barrels per day capacity. Now, this announcement comes after several field commencement deadlines. The Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, says the Nigerian government needs more borrowings to fund its budget, even though ministries, departments and agencies have surpassed their revenue target. Edu said this during an interactive session of the Senate Joint Committees on Finance and National Planning and Economic Affairs on the 2025 to 2027 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper. According to him, the borrowing needs to be done productively and efficiently based on the Senate approval for proper funding of the budget. We'll go on a break now and be back with more stories in the corporate world. Welcome back. Now, in an effort to stem the increasing threats of banking and financial service delivery, Wema Bank, one of Nigeria's lenders, has partnered with anti-fraud agencies, including the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC), the Nigerian Police and KPMG, to share insight and raise awareness and to check the ties within the financial industry. The Financial Institutions Training Center recently reported that Nigerian banks lost 42.6 billion naira to fraud in the second quarter of 2024. This was an 8,993% increase from the first quarter of 2024 and a 637% rise from the second quarter of 2023. Now, speaking at the event held to commemorate the International Fraud Awareness Week 2024 with the theme Share a Story, Stop a Scam, the Managing Director and CEO of Wema Bank, Moruf Osheni, represented by Tunde Mabawonkun, the Executive Director, Retail and Digital Business, emphasized the bank's commitment to championing awareness and combating fraud across the country. Champion Breweries PLC plans to issue over 1 billion naira ordinary shares to raise capital from local and international market, a key agenda item for its extraordinary general meeting slated to be held on December 4, 2024. The announcement, signed by the company secretary and legal advisor Tosin Abioni, was disclosed on the Nigerian exchange platform. Also in the disclosure, the company announced its intention to raise up to 15 billion naira in additional capital, outlining plans to mobilize the fund through various channels subject to the board's discretion. We'll take a short break now, but when Money Matters return, we'll be discussing Nigeria's GDP increasing by 3.46% in the third quarter of 2024. I'll bring you details after this short break. Welcome back. Now, Nigeria's gross domestic product recorded significant growth in the third quarter of 2024, expanding by 3.46% year-on-year. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics. This marks an improvement from the 2.54% growth in the third quarter of 2023 and the 3.19% growth in the second quarter of 2024. The nominal GDP stood at 71.13 trillion naira, reflecting a 17.26% increase from the 60.66 trillion naira in the same period of 2023. The services sector emerged as a primary driver, growing by 5.19% and contributing 53.58% to the total GDP, highlighting its critical role in the economy. The oil sector also showed positive growth with a real increase of 5.17% year-on-year, boosted by an average daily oil production of 1.47 million barrels per day, up from both the third quarter of 2023 and the second quarter of 2024. Now, while the non-oil sector grew by 3.37%, surpassing the 2.755% recorded in the third quarter of 2023, the agricultural and industry sector saw more modest growth of 1.14% and 2.18% respectively. The report underscores the importance of diversifying Nigeria's economy as the services and oil sectors continue to lead the growth. Now let's discuss this further. Financial expert Femi Oladele now joins me on the program. Now, what factors do you think contributed the most to the 3.46% growth in Nigeria's GDP in the third quarter of 2024?
Thank you so much. I I think that I also have to mention that it looks like we are rebounding, and which is a good thing. But also we have to contextualize the figures, and which I don't want to do at this time. But I believe that, like the National Bureau of Statistics mentioned, the service sector contributed heavily to the figure that we have. And that's kind of a good news. And it also has its downsides as well, which we ought to look at significantly. But I would say generally that there has been an increase in the use of services, telecoms, and all the others in Nigeria at this time. If you check, rather than take a 5-hour journey, you could do Zoom calls. And so that has increased the demand for telecommunication services and other banking services as well that we currently have going for us. And if you look at the financial markets as well, rates have been high, and maybe significant subscription has been going on for a while. So I believe that those are some of the factors that combine together to make for the results that we saw recently.
Now, this growth is a significant one, but then I would like to know, how sustainable is the current GDP growth rate of 3.46% in the coming quarters when we consider global and domestic economic factors?
Yeah, sustainability is a totally different conversation, because we are we saying that the best that we can do is 3.46, or are we saying that we want to maintain the growth rate at 3.46% over the coming quarter? So I would say that we still have a very long way to go, especially if you ask me. I always tell my friends that we need real growth in the real sector. And as long as our real sector is not experiencing significant growth, I don't think that that is where Nigeria ought to be at this time. I think what we should be looking at is how to sustain a very significant growth in our real sector. So, uh, looking at the current figures, I don't think it is something that we should overtly celebrate. We should be looking at how we can improve in the other sectors, especially.
The services sector led the GDP growth with 5.19%. Now, how does this compare to historical trends, and what does this suggest about Nigeria's evolving economic structure?
Yes, so historically, the service sector has been a significant contributor to Nigeria's GDP. And like I said just a few minutes ago, that while that is significant, because we cannot discount any sector. Generally, when we look at growth, many times, sometimes we want to, even in the educational sector, you'll be surprised that most people would want to overemphasize STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and undermine or relegate the arts and the social sciences. But the truth is that the things that we would make that would bring real value to Nigeria as a developing economy is in the real sector. And yes, we need the other sectors as well. So for historically, sorry, I'm going back to education, the science sector, no, but the service sector has been a significant contributor historically, and I believe that that would continue, because as much as we increase our real sector growth, definitely the service sector will continue to increase, because if we begin to increase value-added services, then we need other services to continue to to carry those opportunities. So definitely into the future there will be an increase in service sector, especially when it has to do with logistics and telecommunications.
Well, the agriculture sector grew by 1.14%. But this it's a good one for the growth is a good one. But then this is a decline when compared to the 1.30% in the third quarter of 2023. Now, what do you think are the key challenges facing Nigeria's agriculture sector that have led to the slower growth?
Okay, thank you. In the agricultural sector, I know I recall around August that there was a complaint about rainfall in some areas in Nigeria. I believe that's one of the significant factor. On the other side of it, we would have security. Security is important. Many farmers have complained that they were unable to access their farms, and those who were able to access their farms, they had to bear other charges in form of to non-state actors to be able to access those farms, and those are building costs. And finally, when we look at infrastructure, because of the rising cost of fuel, we transporting agricultural produce from the farm to the markets and to other places where they are needed continues to build cost. And so we have that. And I think finally, another significant challenge to agriculture in Nigeria is the agricultural ecosystem itself. How do we store, for example, tomatoes or other perishable goods? And I think that all of that also contributes to rising costs, if you ask me. So I would say generally that in agriculture, if we don't fix those things, and I think I've said this on your program many times, that if we don't fix these underlying issues, we won't be able to experience significant growth in many areas that we currently want to experience growth. Because young people, for example, would not want to go into agriculture if they're not certain of security, if they're not certain of access to infrastructure, if they're not certain of access to machinery that they cannot afford. And that's why I like what the Oyo State government is doing. And I'm not advertising, this is not political, but I've read about it, where there is a partnership between the private sector to provide machinery to farmers to be able to utilize for their farms at very, very good rates. So I believe it because we are way, way behind schedule in the scheme of things globally and regionally. And so we have a lot to do, and there are opportunities. We have the arable lands, we have the human capacity, and we have all of the resources that we need. We just need to put our hearts to it and ensure that we fix those infrastructural issues so that we can then begin to see the dividends of those investments.
Now, let's go back to the services sector again. Now, given the substantial contribution that we've seen now, that's about 53.58% to the overall GDP. Do you foresee any risks or vulnerabilities tied to overdependence on services? Now, that's particularly in light of global economic shifts or inflationary pressures.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you ask any young person, or let me say most young people in Nigeria right now, the significant economic decision, they think it's an economic decision, is to japa. The next to it is to get a job that pays you in foreign currency. And while those are very, very viable options for young people, it's not actually what we should be relying on to drive our service sector. There is a lot that can be happening in the service sector, even in Nigeria, that can boost our economy significantly with respect to logistics, with respect to telecommunications, banking services, even non-banking services, lots of things that we can be doing there. And so I wouldn't say that there would be a fear or a risk of reliance or over-reliance on the service sector. Like I mentioned, if we experience real growth in the real sector, definitely our service sector is going to improve, because what it means is that someone living in Sokoto, for example, would be able to make a request and buy stuff from Lagos and would get it in time. Someone living in Maiduguri, for example, can make a request for something in Calabar and get it on time. So we would need to begin to see, we would rather be seeing lots of value added services on the way, and that would definitely boost our economy. So I wouldn't say that there's a risk in that area. I would say that there is also the opportunity for uptick in that space and sector.
Now, Mr. Oladele, what would you say are the potential implications of this growth for Nigeria's employment rate, especially in sectors like agriculture?
Yeah, so unemployment figures in Nigeria, sometimes when I look at the figures, especially those released by the MBS, I have reservations. I have significant reservations, and while I cannot speak to it professionally because I'm neither a statistician nor an economist, but I have reservations on those figures. But these figures are good for unemployment, especially in the informal sector. What this is telling us is that there are opportunities, and like I always say when I support young people with business advisory, is that innovation and creativity in your business is significant for you to upscale and thrive in the business space. So these figures show that there are opportunities to maximize. It also shows that there are opportunities for especially young people to challenge themselves to get into the labor market and do very great stuff such that they can then be rewarded in the form of profit and wages, depending on how you look at it. Also, I have to say that in the coming months, and I mean December, January, we know that those are very active months in Nigeria. December is the Christmas season and lots of production, lots of activities will be going on. I hope that people learn services. And so that's it. Following in January, usually there will be resumption. Many institutions, many schools would resume. And so that is also important because it means that there will be lots of need for transport, lots of needs to buy stuff, and lots of things to stock in the home and all of that. And so there are very, very significant months, upcoming months. And I believe that these figures provide opportunities to see the good and the silver lining for Nigeria.
And how do you assess the role of inflation, exchange rate, and fiscal policies in shaping Nigeria's GDP growth for the third quarter of 2024? And then also, how might these factors evolve in the next few quarters?
My assessment is relatively subjective because I I have seen the figures, I have read, so I've also listened to some people's mostly economics analysis and all of that. And I believe that what drove this significantly is basically numbers. But these numbers, I would be more interested in seeing the effects in everyday life because I deal mostly with small and medium scale businesses and young people. So I would like rather than just having the numbers and saying, oh, we have a positive growth, we have increase in this sector and in that sector. I would like to see how that translates to a better life for people. So that's why I mentioned that my opinion is subjective in many aspects. But if we look at it globally and see what is happening around the world, then we begin to notice that it looks like Nigeria is trying based on those numbers. But when you go to the streets and you ask in reality, then the issue is mostly largely different from what you hear. And so some people have even claimed that the figures are not necessarily significant if it doesn't translate to a better life, if it doesn't translate to my ability to access food, to access things cheaply or more affordably in the market. So I believe that generally the figures look good, but they should transcend from just mere figures to realities, practical everyday realities for everyone.
Well, just before I let you go, Mr. Oladele, when you started the interview, you said we should not rejoice despite the growth seen in the GDP. Now, so what advice do you have for the government, policymakers, and stakeholders so Nigerians can finally have a reason to rejoice?
Okay, so we're looking at I call it beyond the numbers, productivity beyond the numbers. And so, in my opinion, from what this current administration has been doing, I would say that it's basically textbook. They are increasing rates, and I mean the NPR, and they are doing everything to the letter. But I believe that sometimes we might need to take a back seat and look again at the situation in Nigeria and be certain that the solutions that we're preferring are actually very suitable for Nigeria as a country. Are we looking at that? I'm not in the minds of the policymakers, so I cannot speak to that and I cannot say what they know and the kind of information that they have access to. But what we can see are policy statements and policy implementations that we see. And so from those ones, I would say that generally, Nigeria is still short on social services that can drive productivity. Electricity is one significant one. I don't see how we can make any reasonable uh, improvements in our industrialization drive if we don't fix electricity, if we don't fix transportation. When I was younger, I used to hear people who say, oh, I know about Kafanchan, I know Kaduna. And these are people who live their lives in southwestern states. But they knew about those places because they were able to take a train. Although it used to take a long time, like days to get there, but there was accessibility. Today, you would see someone that has lived all of their lives in Lagos and does not know anywhere outside Lagos. So just imagine that transport is so good that you can move from Lagos to Osun, to Ondo, to Ekiti in one day safely and cheaply. See the kind of productivity that we're going to experience, and that's just transportation. Education is another area. The amount, you would be surprised the amount that Nigerians spend schooling abroad. Also, you'll be surprised at the amounts we spend on healthcare abroad. If all of those costs are embedded in the Nigerian system, definitely our health sector, our educational sector, all of these sectors would improve significantly. But you cannot blame many people because they don't have access to those services. So I believe that generally we need to focus on improving on uh, our services. And we cannot do this by relying on the government alone. I know the government has a significant role to play, but we also need private sector involvement in those sectors. So I would say generally that we need improved social services, road infrastructure, power, internet access, um, education and health, basically. And with those ones fixed, I believe that other things will fall in place. Give a Nigerian access to opportunities. Many Nigerians thrive abroad. Why? Because we have it inherent in us to do great things. But if we don't have an opportunity, we don't have the enabling environment, then we cannot do so much. So I believe in every Nigerian. I believe in our ability to do great stuff, but we also need an opportunity to do those things. And that's one thing that is largely lacking in Nigeria.
Well, financial expert Femi Oladele, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program. That's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Okpeyemi Owosheni. See you next time.